The session is being recorded and we are now live still. So delighted to have everybody here today. Delighted to be able to welcome you, David, as well. The session that we are looking at today is building better L&T from training to learning to development. David, just explain who you are, please, and tell us a bit about yourself.
Absolutely. So happy to be here with you today. David Wentworth, and I work for a company called Skooks. We're an LMS provider. I am the talent platform evangelist at Skooks, and what that means is I like to come out and do things like this and discuss a lot of the things that we're seeing, things that I've seen. I've spent the last 15 years or so as an industry analyst. I was head of L&D research at Brandon Hall Group for a long time, and coming here to Skooks to sort of talk about our vision and mission about how learning and technology intersect. So excited today to talk about this idea of training to learning to development. Andrew and I are having discussions that we wanted to share with everybody around this white paper that we've recently published about these connections. So really looking forward to it.
Excellent. Thank you. And for the people who don't know who I am, my name's Andrew Jacobs, founder and CEO of an organization called Learn Learning. I've worked in learning development for about 30 years. Somebody described me as a learning strategist. You're already muted, Denise. Don't worry, we won't hear your voice. It's not a problem. You're more than welcome to chat away in the background. We can't hear you, so you're fine. If you have got a comment or question, then please just put it in the chat. Someone described me as a learning strategist, which I quite like. So I sit in the space between organizations who need and require learning development activity and organizations who provide and supply learning development resources, technology, and so on. And I'm just really interested in L&D. Like I said, I've been in L&D for about 30 years, and for about the last 15 years, I've been really thinking about how we can improve it and move learning development on. So that's where I'm coming from. So, David, do you want to tell us a little bit about Skook? I keep always pronounce this wrong. Go on, say it again for me.
It's Skooks, and you get a pass because you're in the UK, where you do the soft SCH. Here in the States, there is not a word in American English that does not have a hard K sound with SCH, but so it is Skooks. I'm not offended. We even have a video. It's our most played video is how to pronounce our name on YouTube. So it happens. We understand. But yeah, we are an LMS, and been around since 2012. So hopefully people start to get the name second nature here soon. And you can see a little bit about us on the bullets, but today's obviously less about us and more about the bigger picture as far as learning and technology goes. So let's actually just dive right in, because I think one of the things that you saw on the title screen is maybe a head scratcher when you see training to learning to development. I ask a lot of people whenever I'm doing live speaking sessions, how many folks have the word learning in their job title? Typically the events that I'm at, it's everybody. And then when you then say, okay, how many of you have the word development in your job title? Sometimes it's not everybody, but a vast majority of the people. And I find that we use this phrase, learning and development, becomes one word. It's just, we use it all the time and apply it to everything. And the two words become almost interchangeable. But the reality is as I talk to companies and we think about what they're doing, what they want to do, most are really only doing learning, and development isn't really happening. And if it is happening, it's happening in these weird, disconnected, ways. And for a lot of companies too, they're not necessarily even doing a lot of learning. They're doing a lot of training, which I think there are discrete differences between those three things. They're all connected. They feed into one another, but they are different experiences with different outcomes. So the idea here is to think more about how learning and development are connected, how these two things work together, and how we can use all the great things that we're doing. Because people, when I say most companies are only doing learning, they're doing fantastic work with that, and they're doing some amazing things. How do we then make sure that we're actually creating true development in people within the organization as a result of the learning efforts that we're putting in? I don't know, Andrew, when I say these things, I mean, I see you nodding, so it doesn't seem that strange. I get worried sometimes that people might get offended that I say that you're sometimes only doing training. But I think if you really took a hard look at what's going on in the organization, that's typically the case. What do you think?
I've asked the question in the chat. I'd love to hear from the audience on this. I've asked the question: is learning just training in a different coat? It felt like that learning and development just became from training. So we had training functions, and then we all of a sudden became learning functions, and we were just given different job titles, but we're still just potentially doing the same job. It felt like that. I haven't seen, well, what is it the different? What is the difference between them? Are we seeing it? It feels like, to me, training is part of learning, and it's just been elevated up as part of that.
Yeah.
And Rosie's saying no, training isn't. It is different. And exactly. Thank you, Rosie. Yeah, I think training is part of learning. And what we've done is we've elevated training to be, or we've elevated. How do I phrase this? We've taken training and we now call people learning when organizations still aren't ready for stuff that isn't training. So we do more training. And you're right, Haley, training is more visible and easier for people to sign up to. And I think that's a good point, actually.
Yeah. I think a lot of it comes down to, when you talk about any of these things, one of the biggest challenges companies face, people face, is they say, well, we're
Mm,
just so busy now. We're very busy. And it's understandable. And a lot of times we're very focused on the day to day, putting out the fire that's right in front of you. And that's when learning starts to become more like training, right? How do I just get this done? How do I got to get this from here to there? That's training. It's very difficult sometimes to be able to sit up and do a bigger picture thing with more learning in mind, but people are doing that. But then it's even harder to take a bigger step back and think about overall development and how are we
yeah,
growing that. It's just hard because I'm not saying that people don't want to do this, that don't understand the importance of it. I think they all do. We have these discussions, everyone sort of gets it. And they
yeah,
know what's going on. It's hard to execute, just given the parameters in which we all operate every day, right? It's all about,
absolutely.
what's happening right now. What can we get done today? And so you can see here on some of the bullets, this is kind of the the thesis behind this white paper that Andrew and I are going to be dissecting here in a moment. Is just that the way we think about these things, at least, this is my perspective, as well as, our CEO. I've talked to him endlessly about this. This is where we've come from with this, is that, learning is the enabler for development. You can't have one without the other, but development doesn't occur on its own. So as long as we keep learning connected to all these different developmental objectives, whatever they may be, it's always going to be created and delivered in service of that development. So they have to be linked. They all have to be pointed at the right things. Any of the tools that we use, whether technology, processes, all of the activities, sort of all need to fall into that alignment. Are we all facing in the right direction? Are things all headed towards the right outcomes? And then we're starting to then be able to not just train people to do a task. We're not just helping people learn how to do their job,
Yeah,
but we're then closing that gap between learning and development, and we're giving people the ability to do not only the task, the job, but more, right? And
absolutely.
that's I think the way to think about it.
Absolutely. I have this conversation with people all the time. So I define capability as being capacity plus ability. And that's what learning and development is. So the ability bit is the learning bit, and the capacity bit is building the space for people to learn. So, like I said, capability, capacity plus ability. So the ability is skills, and we can develop those. But how do we develop the capacity stuff in there as well? And I think that's where the conversation needs to move, which is exactly what you're saying. It's that development piece. Well, how are you doing development if you're not having a conversation with the organization? I love in the comment in there, the disassociation. Who was it? Yeah, Edwin. Yeah, disconnection from business performance and learning being a thing which we measure as a learning thing without a business performance thing. And that development piece being absolutely embedded within the performance embedded within development has to happen, I think. And there is a gap there.
Yeah. Yeah, I just had a great conversation with Charles Jennings, and we were talking about how this idea of skills, we've gotten very focused on skills over the last
Yeah.
couple of years, like, but almost to a fault, where we're very hyper focused on skills as the endpoint, right? Like, let's identify the skills, let's identify the gaps, and let's build those skills. That's what we need. But it's and Charles has a great perspective on this. Is like, that is important, but as part of a bigger
Mm,
plan to drive performance, right? You
mm,
can't just focus on the skill. It's like, what happens next? What is the skill in service of? We need to aim at those things rather than the endpoint of these particular skills. So I think that's very much in line with what you're saying here, Andrew, for sure.
mm. Yeah.
Um,
Loving the chat, by the way, everybody. I'm just loving the conversation. I'm just it's
yeah,
just flowing through the whole time. It's absolutely outstanding. So thank you, everybody. Isn't it nice just to take a bit of time out and just reflect and pause on actually, well, what are we doing and why are we doing it? So well done, everybody. Thank you for your comments.
yes. Yeah, these are my favorite things. Like, as Andrew, we're not going to have these very data heavy slides with charts that we're going to walk you through. This is about a discussion. Obviously, Andrew and I have the good fortune to have the microphones to have the conversation with each other, but it's very important that you guys continue to have this conversation in the chat to help us, guide us, talk to us through there, talk to each other. Yeah, I agree. I love this. So, as far as what we wanted to get through today and where we wanted to focus, obviously this is a very big picture thing. We should continue to talk about this for ages, right? Because we're always in pursuit of making things better. But when I looked at it and I broke it down into a few main areas of, okay, how does learning connect to other things and in service of overall development? And it runs the gamut from the sort of most specific thing to bigger, more general things. And I put a handful of them here, about the connection of learning to onboarding, to coaching, to overall engagement, to performance, as we mentioned, overall business impact and career development. And so what we wanted to do today was find out, from the folks that are on the call, which one of these would you like us to sort of dive into? Because in the time allotted, we're not going to be able to, really pull apart every single one, but we wanted to focus on the ones that people think are the most interesting. So I think actually, Andrew, yeah, you've got
There we
a
go.
tool we can use to find out where we want to go, and that QR code
Absolutely.
would take you to the white paper itself if you want to look at that at some point. But yeah, we just wanted to find out what we want us to talk about so we can go there.
And as happens, as soon as you open a poll up, everybody starts clicking on things immediately. Thank you, everybody. We can see the live scores and the live results as they're coming through, which is awesome. So there's 6 areas there. So what are the 6 out of those 6 areas? What are your priorities? What are the things you want to hear about? From David and myself this morning. Like he says, we're not going to go through all 6. Sorry, we won't have time. We'll probably get through 3 or 4, I would think. And interesting to see what the priorities are from people. There seems to be 4 immediately that people want to hear about, David.
Yeah, let's see. I mean, it looks like, I'm not too surprised that business impact is
Hmm.
high on the list. That's always a big one. And then engagement, I think that's interesting to me. I'd love to talk about that. And then, well, you already brought up performance, so you can see how important that
Yeah,
one is. It looks like that's where things are headed right now.
yeah. So I'm guessing we go engagement. Oh, sorry, we go
Sure.
business impact, engagement, then performance, and then see how we go on from there.
Yeah, however, whichever order you want to do it in, let's do it.
Awesome. Yeah, well, those 3: engagement, performance, business impact. Let's look at those 3 and
Okay.
see how we go, and if we have more time for any others. So, we want to look at engagement. So let's go to engagement first of all.
Okay. So this is an interesting one for me, and I like the choices that were made and the order in which, because they're much different perspectives, each one of these, right? So engagement to me, compared to the others, is a bit of a narrow focus, which is good. And it starts with learner engagement, right? So there's 2 things. There's overall engagement, that people are engaged in the company, in their work, and then there's the learner engagement. I think we need to start there, engaging learners. That's a very important thing. We hear about it all the time. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, what we hear about when learning professionals talk about learner engagement, they're talking about being in the content, being in the learning experience itself, right? Did I use the right graphics? Are the colors right? Do people feel engaged by what they're looking at, what they're hearing, what they're seeing? Am I using videos? Those things are all very important, but they are secondary to the initial engagement we need to create, because what you're assuming by putting all of your engagement efforts into the content, into the material itself, you're assuming that the people coming into that content are already engaged, right?
Mhm.
They are there with a purpose, and a lot of times they're not. They are being given, here is this training module, here is this learning experience that you should or need to do. It's a lot of fun. Go on and get in there, and then you get in, and then you try to engage them once they're in. It's important to build great content. We know that. We've got a lot of people who are really, really good at that. But if someone is coming to that content cold, doesn't have any idea of why they're there, what it means, what it's for, you are fighting uphill for engagement. And I'm telling you right now, if people don't know, hey, what's in it for me from the get-go,
Mhm.
doesn't matter how engaging your video is, how great your quiz is, you're already starting, below zero. So it's more about, okay, how do we set people up for success from the beginning, right? Do they know what's in it for me? And I talk about this a lot. If you've ever heard me before, you've probably heard me talk about what's in it for me, and about how that phrase needs to be recognized as a positive thing. I think it has a sort of negative connotation. People think it's selfish when people say what's in it for me. But the reality is every single person alive is asking themselves that question
Mhm.
all the time. Anytime they engage with anything, they are either consciously or subconsciously asking themselves, what's in it for me? Why should I do this thing? Why am I being driven to do this? And if you can answer that question in a clear and articulate way, you've already built up massive amounts of engagement, that allow people to really get into what you're doing. So it's really about understanding, what is the ultimate goal of this particular piece of learning, or this experience, or this program that I'm putting together? How does that align with what the learners need to know? And then what do they get out of it? What does the business get out of it? Putting that all on the table and saying, this is what's going on. Then you've built that level of engagement. So having that relevance is very critical. Like, this is relevant to me. This matters. It's not redundant. It's not something that I've already seen before. You know enough about me that you're not giving me stuff I don't need.
Yep.
But really, it's about engaging learners before they ever interact with learning.
I agree 100%. It's interesting we talk about engagement. I know you've nailed this. Is the the idea that people are invited to something or they are mandated to something, and the difference between being invited and being mandated will have an effect on how they work with that learning activity all the way through. If you're mandated to do something, your levels of engagement are going to be very different than if you are willfully wanting to engage with something yourself. And I think there's a really interesting piece there that we don't at the moment, as far as I can tell. I don't see anybody tracking this stuff through to look and go, well, if someone's mandated, how more engaged are they with it than, or less engaged are they with somebody who has chosen just to, do the thing for their own benefit? It's a voluntary approach, which I think is why. I thank you very much, Edwin. Exactly, the onboarding piece is really important. How you onboard people and onto learning development activity, and whether you're inviting them on, or forcing them to be there, and that engaging people before they ever interact with learning, I think, is important. I love there's some customer service standards for these go back years and years and years. They're called R8, and I think these are wonderful ways to test the quality of your engagement before you start. And so double RATE. So the first R is reliability. So people can go to your learning and trust that the learning you're supplying will do what they want it to. The second R is responsiveness, that it is flexible to what they want to do. It doesn't cover everything, but it covers the stuff that they want. So they can pick and choose and flex within it. And so you generate engagement that way. It's assured. So it is professional in terms of language, design, and so on. And so that people know that they're getting something of quality. The tangibles work. So all the clicks work and everything works as it needs to do. And lastly, and the hardest, which is the E, which is empathy, is that actually the learning is written and produced and created and available from that learner's perspective. I have real problems, which is why you picked it up, the graphics, fonts, videos and stuff, and infantilizing content when people, they did that stuff in school. They don't need bright primary colors and little animations. And I have great fun in conversations with people from the US all the time about ADDIE and, over engineering stuff, when actually it's probably simple as just R8.
Yeah. So I saw a couple of interesting things. One, in the question, Miriam was asking any examples of relevance, and it's not necessarily a specific example, but time and time again, you hear this about one size fits all learning, and that's used as a negative term, but it's done very often where a program is put together and put out to everybody, regardless of their role or maybe their tenure. It's about being able to, and look, I know personalization is very important. Relevance is important. It's not possible in a lot of cases to do it down to the individual person. I don't think that's what's being required. But the idea that if my role and my experience, maybe I don't get served up the same learning programs as somebody who's new, somebody onboarding, relevant, and make it more relevant to my job. Just making sure that you're not just blanketing people with material that maybe they don't need, maybe is redundant. Recognizes who that person is as far as their role, what they already know, what their path is, things that we hopefully already know, right? We have that data, we have that knowledge, that information somewhere. Are we able to pull it together in a way that allows us to then deliver them stuff that doesn't, because if you start to give people learning experiences that say, well, hey, you're giving me this stuff, but I'm already certified in this area. Why are you giving this? You're not, now you're disrespecting me, or you're not recognizing my efforts, even though it's just something automated. Nobody purposefully did anything. That's how it's sometimes perceived. So just making sure we're taking the time to think about those things. I think. I don't know if you have any real world examples of relevancy, Andrew?
The so the example I always quote is the crossing the road example. If you're going to teach a child to cross the road, we used to have it in the UK in the 1970s. We used to have the Green Cross Code, and it showed a video, and the guy we had the Green Cross Code man, the guy who actually played Darth Vader in the original films, David Prowse, he was the Green Cross Code man, and he would stand there and show these short videos and show people how to cross the road. What he didn't do was discuss the braking system of a 5 Series BMW. But this is what we do in learning and development. What we do is, if we were going to produce something around crossing the road and a module crossing the road, we go into all the details about, well, why this car will brake over this distance, etc. And we apply too much context to something sometimes, when actually what people need is just the how do I cross the road bit, rather than I need to know the braking distance of this vehicle, because I need to understand how much time I've got before I cross the road. It can be much more simple than that, and we over contextualize, I think, sometimes. And I think that's where the relevance piece falls in.
Mm. Yeah.
And people in the UK recognizing him. Why do I need to cross the road? Said Rosie, and picture saying, actually, he visited our school, the Green Cross Code man. I'll find a link and paste a picture so everybody can get an idea of what he looked like.
That's awesome. I like that. And then the other one I want to pick out here was Jonna said engagement is not just for learners, but it's their management as well.
Yeah.
There's a whole other section of this that we could go into for sure, but it's so important. I do want to bring it up because it is a part of the engagement piece, is making sure that the managers and the supervisors are on your side. There's nothing that will ruin a program faster than a manager saying, all right, team, we stop what you're doing. We have to do this stupid learning thing. And, they've already shut down your engagement because they're not bought into it. They feel like it's a waste of time. They feel like, it's not helping their team. So if the manager is either your worst enemy or your best friend, where if you guys connect, can communicate and say, look, here's what's in it for them. Here's what's in it for you. Here's how your teams get better. Here's why this is important. You get them on your team, and then they become your spokesperson, and then they help build engagement, because that's really who the team is going to listen to, is the manager. They don't necessarily are going to listen to the L&D team about what's important for them. The manager is the one that understands the workflow, understands the job they're doing, understands their day-to-day. So they're the ones that are who they're going to turn to. And if a manager is modeling bad learning behavior or a bad attitude towards learning, that's going to be a huge struggle. So it's often a blind spot for a lot of companies. They kind of skip right over that and go straight to the team and don't realize what's happening in the middle there.
Absolutely. And it's brilliant you mentioned Charles Jennings earlier. Charles wrote a blog post, must have been about 15 years ago, 14, 15 years ago. And he did some research into the impact of managers, and he picked up on the impact of managers. And the single most effective way to improve engagement with learning is the line manager. The line manager is the best way to make sure that people are engaged and learn more successfully. And people will be more successful with their learning activity if their line manager is engaged. I will try and find a link to the blog post while we're chatting away. So I'm using off so many screens here trying to find this. So if I can dig it out, I will link to it. But you're quite right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think even a goal to shoot for is at least neutral. You want your managers to be at least neutral about learning. And because you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't be surprised, at a lot of times the negative perception that team leaders, supervisors, managers have of learning. So if you can at least get them to, an even keel, you'll knock down that barrier, and then hopefully you can then cultivate an advocate over time.
Yeah,
Did
excellent.
do we want to jump into what the next one, which would have been
Yeah, the next one we were looking at that people identified was performance. So performance, that should be here. There we go. Let's look at
yeah.
performance.
And this is one of those ones that whenever I start to talk about it out loud, I feel a little awkward, only because I feel like everyone gets it. It's like it's like a no brainer, right? Yeah, of course, learning and performance. Why else would we be doing it? But I've been doing this long enough. Andrew, you've been doing it long enough to realize that that's not necessarily the case. It's just not how it actually exists in practice. And so more thought has to be put into it. More work has to be put into it, making those two things connected. And there's a couple different ways to think about it. There's obviously from the learning side of things that the ultimate outcome of learning cannot be learning, right? The fact that I finished this thing cannot be the outcome of the learning, regardless of what the learning is about. I don't care if it's the simplest compliance driven piece of learning that exists. It isn't just that someone finished, it's that once they're done, they are now doing something correctly, differently, whatever it is. But that's the outcome. It isn't the fact that they finished it. And I'm guarantee everybody on the call has been beaten over the head for years about how it's got to be more than completion rates. But again, getting back to day to day, putting out the fires, that's the easiest thing to go to, because it's almost automatic. It's immediate, that measurement. But I think there's a lot of this idea that, hey, we here in the L&D team, we are really fantastic at our job. We are so good at it that all I need to do is create the learning and deliver it. My job is done, because I know that it's good and I know that it's effective. So all they have to do is
Yeah.
do it, and then all the good things will follow. That may be true, but we need to find out if that's actually what's happening, so we can get better and do the right thing. So it can't just be about completion rates. By connecting to performance, however your organization thinks about performance or manages performance, it's going to be different in every case, but figuring out how to make those connections is going to help identify what the skills gaps are in your organization, which is always a challenge. Companies always want to know, I don't know what skills I don't have what I need. A connection between learning and performance gives the learners that kind of context, right? That idea of, hey, what's in it for me? Well, here's what we want from you. Here's what we think you should be able to know, do, at the end of this. And it ensures that, hey, this particular piece of learning that I'm engaged with, I know how I'm going to apply that on the job in the future, because it's connected to this particular kind of performance, whatever it is. And so I think as the performance management process has evolved over the years and has gotten better, moving away from that annual, you were good here, not here, here's your pay rise, let's move on. It's moving to a more continuous conversation, which it should. Not there yet, I don't think, but as it moves there, learning has to also model that, right? So the continuous learning, the constant improvement of performance based on those conversations. Hey, we're finding out that people are struggling with this. We think things are going really well here. Let's shift our efforts from a learning perspective, to fix that. So as much as it makes complete sense when you say it out loud, it's not really happening in practice that learning and performance are really connected.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the comment from Jana in the chat. In our e-learning content shifted from learning objectives to performance outcomes, and that's a brilliant way to start thinking about how to shift this stuff on, Jana. I think you're absolutely spot on from that. It is the changing the language um, in order to be related much more to what's happening within the business. I put a comment in there: the best learning platform is the burning platform, and uh, you know, the most urgent thing is the thing that everybody does, and that's where the learning stuff happened. I was working for HMRC, um, uh, the UK's version of the IRS, as the pandemic hit, and there was a ton of learning, because all of a sudden the government announced the furlough scheme in the UK. Well, guess what? The scheme had been announced, but one hadn't been designed, and two, none of the employees had actually been trained on how this was going to work. So guess what? Everybody then had to work on was, what's this going to look like in practice? How will we know that it's been working? It wasn't about the learning activity. It was about how effective were people able to move on to the furlough scheme, and that's where it became a very different approach. And it isn't about completion rates. Just because people have done something, so what? It's meaningless. It doesn't mean anything at all. In terms of evaluation methods, the my company, we're doing a whole piece around evaluation that looks at a simple logic model of input, output, outcome, and impact, and how we can model some of that stuff. If anybody wants to connect me afterwards, then please feel free. And I'm happy to chat through that with people. But there's a whole piece around that about understanding performance. I think the other issue we have performance is we talk about, and this goes back to Jana's comment, is that learning is often aligned with the business, and as long as you're aligned with the business, you'll always be parallel to. You won't be integrated with, and that's, I think, where we fall down sometimes with learning and development. We are seen as a partner to, and not a partner with.
Yeah, yeah. The impact, and we're going to talk a little bit, I think, in the next bit about business impact. But getting into some of these metrics, because people are asking about it beyond completion rates, that's sort of the challenge. Is like, people saying they use the Kirkpatrick model. It's a great model, and whether you like explicitly use the Kirkpatrick model or not, you're probably thinking along those lines anyway, right? Moving from completion to demonstration of knowledge to impact and so forth. So the problem becomes, thinking of the Kirkpatrick model, you think of it as 1, 2, 3, 4. And so, it's these natural steps that I'll take. But the distance between 2 and 3, the ability to say, give an assessment to find out that somebody, understands what they learned, to then they're doing those things and things are being impacted, is a massive gap. It's hugely different to do that. And so it's very hard. And one of the things that makes it hard is there isn't just a simple list you can go out on the internet and pull down and say, okay, I'm going to measure these 6 things. It becomes very unique to every organization. So what it becomes is just what Andrew's talking about, being a partner with rather than to, is you can't use a Kirkpatrick model within the sphere of learning alone, right? You can't just stay within your little learning bubble and look at the Kirkpatrick model and say, okay, are these things happening? You have to work with the business, the stakeholders, to say, hey, listen, when we're here at levels 3, level 4, what are these things? What does good look like? What do you need people to do? How do you know, as a business leader, how do you know that things are working? How do you know that this person is excelling and this person isn't? What does that look like? How do you measure that? Tell me, and then we can see how we can make those things happen, rather
Yeah.
than just having those stakeholders turn to you, say, make learning that gets people better at sales,
Yeah.
or whatever it is. It's what are these specific things that I can recognize that say this has happened? And for the most part, most of these metrics, and like I said, we'll get into the business impact here in a minute, but even performance wise, most of these kinds of metrics are being captured somewhere in
Yeah.
your organization. Somebody is tracking this stuff.
Yeah.
And in some cases, it might just be a piece of software that's tracking it. Nobody's even aware that it's being tracked, but these things are being captured. And it's a question of who owns it? How do I get it? How do I work with that person or those people to make sure that we're backing forth and having an impact on those outcomes?
Absolutely. And this is where we talk about learning and development. The development part of learning and development is having the agency and the permission to go and speak with those different parts of the organization and agree that they'll happily share that data with you. And that's when you're talking development. That's when you're talking about context within the business. That's when you're talking about the work you're doing having an impact and being related to it. Because otherwise, you're just doing learning theatre. It sits outside of the business. If you're having those conversations, and that's part of the shift for development, which is why I like that the slide you showed before, is being involved in those conversations with the business. That's when you're moving things forward.
Yeah, and not being involved in this in the sense of observing and taking notes, right? It's, are we talking the same language? Can I translate the things that these stakeholders talk about when they're concerned about development, growth, performance? Can I translate that into some sort of learning outcome? Like you mentioned, Andrew, that moving from learning outcomes to performance objectives or things like that, but those things still exist. It isn't at the expense of learning outcomes. Those still exist, but does that learning outcome translate to what it is that the business stakeholders say, this is what I want, this is what I need people to do, either better, faster, stronger, or something new, whatever it is. And like I said, those things all exist. It's just a question of, are you involved enough in those conversations that you're speaking the same language, not just you completely capitulating to the way they discuss things, but the business also understanding how humans work, right? How, like, hey, that sounds great what you're saying there, but people don't work that way. People don't learn that way. Here's how we can make that happen if we think about it this way, because
That's
they're
yeah,
not thinking about these performance outcomes through that filter. They're just saying, I want this thing to happen. We as learning
yeah,
professionals are the ones that hopefully interject that human element that says, great, in order for that to happen, we have to approach it in this way to
yeah,
get people, the runway to be able to do that. Because I don't think in
yeah.
most cases that they're thinking like that.
I'll just speak to that before we move on to the last one, which is the third one, which I think is a really interesting point, which is what we have done is we've conditioned people to ask for courses. And so they come and say, can I have a course? What they
Yep.
don't say is this the performance problem I've got, which is why I love the fact was it Jano again saying reevaluation, we find out our baselines, really important, because instead of someone saying, oh, we want a course, well, actually, do you really want a course? Is it a course that's going to fix this problem? Let's help understand what the problem is, and then we can supply the right thing in order to be able to help. Because you know what, supply the right thing might just be a GIF that we put together of half a dozen images stitched together, which you can use to understand how to use the software system. It hasn't got to be a whole piece, a whole course. It's just something simple that people can then use when they need it. And sometimes it's that conversation early on to be able to take stuff forward, I think, is really interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm trying to read through Chris's reply to you here about this sort of umbrella training, compliance training,
Yeah,
has the chance to debase other good work you're doing. Um, yeah, and so I often come back to, listen, compliance training is a big part of what we all do, right? It's just, it
yeah,
will be for forever, and that's an acceptance. But there's a way to go about it that feeds into all of this stuff that we're talking about. That's another connection. Learning and compliance is, I mentioned it before, even the most simplistic compliance-based training. Somebody had mentioned in the chat earlier about how it's about protecting the company, right? Oh, this, unfortunately, a lot of training is about protecting the company. Okay, but that's just a perception, right? That's how this particular piece of training has been marketed to you, to the learners, as finish this so that we are protected. It's like, okay, let's dig in there. And why does this exist in the first place? Why does this regulation exist? Why does this compliance need exist? Whatever it happens to be, there's a reason it exists. And it isn't just so that we don't get sued and that we check the box. There's something there. So let's
yeah.
focus on what that is. Is it so that people in the hospital are washing their hands properly so that other people aren't getting sick? I mean, the amount of conversations I've had with healthcare providers, and that's their number one training issue, is how do I get people to wash their hands better? It's okay, there's a reason behind it. It isn't just, okay, hey, listen, everybody took the hand washing training, we're fine. It's, no, are they actually doing the thing, right? Or are we being safe with our forklift drivers? Are they not running into each other or running people over in the warehouse? It isn't just they are certified forklift drivers. It's like, are those behaviors being exhibited? There's a reason behind all of these, and we focus on that rather than well, we don't want to get sued, we don't want to get a fine. Those are important too, but that's more stick than carrot, and there's always a carrot in there somewhere. It's probably better to focus on that.
And so I've just linked to another piece on called AI, but not that AI. Appreciative inquiry is a really interesting way to take that forward, and it actually says, well, what is the positive that we're looking for? What are the positives that we've got now, and why are we taking that forward? It's a very different approach. Again, I even get your point, Chantal. What problem you're trying to solve? It is to an extent, but actually, what's the good stuff that we want to happen and do more of? And it's recognizing that sometimes. Really
Yeah,
interesting. Should we move to our third
yeah,
point, which was business impact? We seem to be sliding into that space already. So let's go to business
of
impact.
course. Yeah, and of course, this is the big one, and this is multiple sessions all in itself, right? We've talked about this a lot, but again, all these connections that we're talking about, I think if we talked about the performance one, clearly you can't have this without that, right? They're all intertwined. But again, it's about figuring out what the business driver is behind any learning that you do, so that you can draw that line between what the business gets out of it, based on what the learner puts into it as an employee, and then what the employee gets out of it as far as their development goes. But they get to see that line of this activity that I'm taking part in is going to benefit me, which is going to benefit the company, all of that, that sort of thing. And then one other thing that I think gets missed a lot is if you're able to show this impact, to show that this change is occurring because of the training and learning and development that you've been doing, you're then able to turn around and show learners this, right? I think that gets missed a lot. Whatever we're tracking for metrics, as learning, we like to deliver the learning and then measure it and then take those results and then show it to somebody else, right? Like, oh, let's go to the C-suite, let's go to and show what we've done, without going back to learners going, look what we've accomplished, look what's happened as a result of this. Again, showing them the what's in it for me, actually showing them the results. You're building future engagement. You're constantly, building up, saying this stuff works. All these great things are happening for you, for us, for the team, for the company, what have you. And then if you're able to have those kinds of discussions, you're able to articulate the impact that learning is having. Of course, then you're getting the business stakeholders even more invested, right? If you can, those conversations we were talking about earlier, if you have those, and then you can come back and say, okay, we did it, this happened, then those stakeholders are even more like, oh, let's do this, let's more of this, please, let's have more of these discussions. What else can we fix? What else can we grow? And I think that's even me just saying that comes back to Andrew. You made a great point about it isn't just about fixing problems. We need to get out of that mindset too, which I know it feels like every day that's all we're doing, right? Is you're fixing some problem, but it's got to be more than that. It's got to be about the growth beyond fixing the problem. We will always be fixing problems, but it's more about what value add are we doing on top of that? What kind of growth, what kind of development are we creating on top of that? But yeah, being able to decide, what these particular business metrics are, and then work your way backwards, right? So starting with the big thing, starting with what is it that the company needs? It could be as big and as nebulous as revenue growth, right? Okay, well, that's a business outcome. That's something that they have as a goal. How do we do that? Well, in order for that to happen, this team needs to do this team needs to do that. Okay, well, then how do we get with that team and make sure that they're doing the things that make that happen, right? It's just working your way backwards down to creating some sort of learning and development program that is aimed at that. And then you can come back around and say, okay, this is what happened. And it's getting yourself in a mindset where measurement of impact is not an end state. It isn't the last thing on this linear path of learning. If learning is going to be linear, which we can argue that it is or it isn't, which I don't think it is, but if you're going to think about it that way, measurement's at the beginning, right? What is it I'm after? What are the things that I'm trying to achieve here so I can come back and see if that happened or not? And then, it's easy for me to sit here and say these things. It's very difficult in practice for an organization to get these things happening, but it's a process. It's an evolution. It happens slowly over time. It gets better. And understanding what those business outcomes are, how to measure them. Not as easy as just let's do it tomorrow, obviously, but you got to work in that direction. But I get a lot of learning leaders say, well, there's too many other variables within the organization that occur that allow us to say that we had that impact, right? Something good happens in the business and it's like, well, things are seasonal, or we just hired a whole new sales team, or we just did this and that's why. But every other part of the organization is going to claim their piece of that improvement. So why is learning so afraid to grab their own? And I think it's because we've always relied on sort of weak metrics to say, listen, 98% of people completed the training, so we're good, right? And that's just not enough. And so it's hard to come to the table with that. But those impacts are happening. So being able to identify them and articulate them and come and say, yeah, of course, other things happened, but we had an impact too. Here's how things were baseline. Here's how things are now. We did learning initiatives in between there, so we had some impact. So just being more confident to claim ownership of your part, of being one of those variables, if not one of the biggest variables.
And that's exactly what happened to me. So I was working in local government in 2009 in the UK, and in 2010 we had a general election, and new government came in and they brought in austerity. So we had to cut a load of money out of our budget. So I was being asked to prove, well, were we having an impact and what impact were we having? And I had a wonderful moment. It was just that moment where you go, I get it now, where I was sitting in a classroom, on a training course and someone mentioned something to me, and I thought, oh, that's a really good idea. And I went away. It was nothing related to the course, but I started applying it to things I was doing, and it made a massive difference to the stuff that I was doing. It was like really cool approach. I can't remember what it was now. Now, if I hadn't been at the training course, I wouldn't have learned that. And the training course gets the credit for my improvement when it was nothing to do with the content. It was just the fact that I happened to be in a room with somebody at the same time when they said something. Um, and like I say, it wasn't part of the content. But to then get that sense of, well, is it the course that's had that effect? Well, it was the getting people together that created the circumstance where I could do it. Now, all right, maybe the content didn't do it, but my performance improved as a result. So what we should be able to do is to track back in some form, which I think is exactly as you say, not be scared of claiming a bit of the pie to go, that success, that's down to us creating the space for these people to do things differently.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, like I said, don't be afraid. Especially, I think we get wrapped up in the ROI discussion, which I don't. We could argue about that on another
Hmm.
day. But as far as business impact goes, I think a lot of people, their brain goes to ROI. Like, well, I want to be able to walk into the C-suite with the spreadsheet that has the dollars that show. That's probably not going to be your best bet, and that's why
Yeah, yeah.
a lot of L&D leaders are unwilling to do that, because they don't have that ROI figured out, and they fear, I'm never going to figure it out. If you get away from that kind of thinking and more about just the overall impact that you're having on all of these other things, it's an easier discussion to have. Look, Edwin had mentioned about making sure that a learning and development professional understands business and not just their immediate role. For sure. And I know that's a big ask. Say, well, why do I have to be this really? I'm fantastic at my job. I've been done it for a long time. I'm an L&D leader, but I also have to be a business leader as well. Well, kind of, like, that's what we're all doing.
Hmm.
Learning isn't, to me, we got to get learning, and you can fight me later. We got to get learning out of HR. Learning
Yep,
is a tool of the business to get the business to do what it wants to do and to grow. So you should have sort of a business head on your shoulders somewhat. I'm not saying everybody needs to race out and get an MBA. I think it's more just, it is on us to have a little bit better understanding of our particular business, at least, right? And the benefit is, there's a good chance that the business side doesn't have the insight into people that you have, and that's the key, right? Is business leaders, they think about things in terms of the business, about numbers, about process.
yep.
It's up to us to be able to translate all of those things into human stuff. And
Exactly.
that is not easy. And that is what we bring to the table. Unfortunately, it's very hard to create a spreadsheet that says, I made your stuff human. Like, it's being able to point to all of these other things that allow you to do that.
Absolutely. So the quote I put, so Hilary Mantel, the author and historian, died a couple of years ago, bless her. I love this quote. Evidence is always partial. Facts are not truth, although they're part of it. Information is not knowledge. It's just absolutely spot on. And it's how we weave those things together to create uh, a narrative, I think, is the thing. And so what's the narrative we want to build? Okay, so do your organization want to know that 72% of people thought that the learning was fun? No, what your organization wants to know is that people performed as a result of doing it. Oh, and by the way, they're engaged and they found stuff fun, and this is the stuff that they've said about it, and these are the stories that they've said, and you tell us the stories that you saw happen as well as a result of them doing that thing. And that's where it is. It's changing the way we think about it. I've mentioned before moving from being a shopkeeper to an engineer, and that's the move that learning development needs to make. Not be at the end of the process where everybody says, right, okay, we now just need a course, but actually be involved engineering what needs to be done very early on within the process.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, it's not easy. And like I said, it's not something that whenever I talk about this stuff or present, I know that you're not going to be able to do this tomorrow.
Mhm.
It's a work in progress. You're always sort of arcing toward it, right? Getting better over time, and every time you apply these kind of principles, it gets easier, gets better, and then soon you've got, it's not you against the world, right? It's not L&D against everybody else.
Yeah.
Soon people are on your side, right? When they start to see and start to recognize these connections of how learning is affecting the business, affecting overall engagement, affecting the culture of the company in general. They start to recognize that they see you as like one of their dearest allies, and how can we help, to make it better. It's about doing the work, and the work that we're already doing. I mean, to be fair, this isn't about um, changing the things that you're good at. It's just about reframing and reorienting around these other things and applying it differently, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. We're into our last 3 minutes, so I'll need to close this down just so that we can consider everything that's come up. Massively well done, everybody. Thank you for the conversation. I loving
Mhm.
the conversation that's going on in the chat. Absolutely amazing, some of the stuff. Thank you to Michelle from Skooks. Have I said it right?
Skooks.
Skooks.
School with an X.
School
That's
with
how
an
we.
X.
There we go.
Skooks. Skooks. So thank you, Michelle from Skooks as well, who's been answering some of the questions and in the chat as well. So really, really cool, and thank you for doing that stuff for us. We've got some links there, and we've got the QR code again. If you haven't got it, don't panic. I'm just going to put a wrap up slide up in a second, and you'll be able to see. There we go. There's the white paper and so on. So click on the blue link at the top there, and that will take you to the white paper. And it also takes you to the They Learn You Win podcast, which David runs. So tell briefly about the podcast, David. What's good in the podcast?
I mean, it's been fantastic. I've been very pleased. We started at the beginning of the year, and just conversations like this with thought leaders, practitioners. Like we like to focus on companies, that are winning. Like, so we'll have a company come on, the L&D leader, share their wins, what's working for them, how things are going well. So not only are there episodes of pure thought leadership or pure sort of projection into the future, what's might happen, but then we also have episodes of real, here are some things that are actually happening that are working. So very cool, very a lot of great stuff for everybody. I think we both mentioned Charles Jennings recently. That's the most recent recording I did. I think that one will be coming out here in a week or two. I've had a session with the head of global L&D for McDonald's, Lon Tron, talking about how they deliver learning to millions of people. So a lot of interesting things that go on there if you want to check that out.
Excellent stuff. Just been asked where the Hilary Mantel quote came from. It was a 2017 Guardian article, Bill. I haven't got the link to that one immediately in front of me, but if you search her, you should be able to find her. You've got David's and my contact details if you want to connect with us, details of the recording as well. I've also put a link to my podcast. I say my podcast, it's not my podcast, it's Women Talking About Learning, and it is my favorite thing, where I just get to hear smart women talk about all this stuff as well, which is amazing. And I've also put the links in for the Green Cross Code Man, so anybody not from the UK can click on it and go, what, is this what you did? In the UK for television, and also the other links to Charles Jennings and Appreciative Inquiry.
I thought you were going to get into the fact that you call them lollipop
Lollipop
women
Man,
as opposed
yeah,
to crossing guards.
yeah,
So
we do. I know. It's amazing, that, isn't it? Yeah, Lollipop Man. Everybody in the
yeah,
UK knows that. You just hold that up, and everyone goes, "Yeah, Lollipop Man." Everybody else around the world goes, "What?"
what? um, listen, so what's great for me, I think, is next month I'll be over there. I'll be at Learning Technologies. So
Awesome.
if anybody wants to swing by the Skooks booth and say hi and argue with me or agree with me, come on by. We'll be hanging out. But I'm really looking forward to being over there and seeing everybody.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm definitely going to stop by and say hello to you. It'd be lovely to catch up and meet face to face, David. I've done a couple of these with David, and yeah, good fun. And thank you for all your comments, everybody. Really, really nice comments. I really enjoyed this session. Something different today, and yeah, a really good engagement with everybody again. So thank you again for all your time. The recording will be available from tomorrow, like we said, where you can go back through and pick out all of those links. I am going to close the doors now, though, so you're all going to disappear and be on hold. So just leaves me to say thank you again, everybody, for your time. Really, really interesting comments, and hope you have the good rest of the day. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all.